The 1980s were a time of big hair, neon colors, and budding technology. But for those of us who lived through it, the decade was also marked by many moments that changed the world. Among the laughter of Emmy Award-winning sitcoms and the rise of music TV, there were events that unfolded which reminded us of the fragility of life and the weight of history. In the early years of the decade, the world watched in horror as two tragedies unfolded. In March 1981, a failed assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan by John Hinckley Jr. left the nation holding its collective breath. Thankfully, Reagan survived, and his resilience would come to define his presidency. Just months earlier, in December 1980, the world had mourned the loss of a legend, John Lennon, who was senselessly shot outside his New York apartment by a lunatic named Mark David Chapman. These moments felt surreal, shaking a generation that was just beginning to find its voice. Then, on January 28, 1986, a day that began like any other would become one of the most defining moments for most of Generation X. The Space Shuttle Challenger, carrying 7 brave astronauts, including the first civilian, a schoolteacher named Krista McAuliffe, exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff.
T-minus 21 seconds, and the solid rocket booster engine gimbal now underway. T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Now controlling.
Roger, roll, Challenger.
Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
So the 25th Space Shuttle mission is now on the way after more delays than NASA cares to count. This morning it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Looks like a couple of the solid rocket boosters blew away from the side of the shuttle in an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
We're awaiting word. They're holding their breath just, I'm sure, as everyone else is. You saw it just a few moments ago, about 45 seconds after liftoff, a huge fireball in the sky.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point. Contingency procedures are in effect. We will report more as we have information available. Again, to repeat, we have a report relayed through the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. We are now looking at all the contingency operations and awaiting word from any recovery forces in the downrange field. Continue.
What appears to be a major catastrophe in America's space program. Challenger, only seconds after leaving the launch pad, according to NASA, has exploded in midair. No word yet on if there are any survivors.
Millions of Americans, including countless school children, watched the launch live. For many Gen X kids, Watching the launch was a rare and exciting break from routine. Teachers had wheeled televisions into classrooms so students could witness history in the making. But instead of triumph, they saw a tragedy unfold before their eyes. The explosion was a collective shock to our nation, a moment frozen in time. There were gasps, tears, and an eerie silence that followed. Yet for many of the kids who watched, there was no guidance on how to process what they had seen. After a few stunned minutes, the TVs were turned off and students went back to math problems and lunch breaks. It was as if the gravity of the event had no place in the structure of their day. I had already graduated high school when this tragedy occurred and was working at the time of the launch. I could only imagine how it felt to be in elementary school or junior high, watching the event unfold live. I remember watching the news later that evening, along with President Reagan's address, sitting in stunned silence with my mom. His speech captured the collective grief and admiration of a nation. In it, he said, "The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them. This morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." He also directly addressed the school children.
And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them.
His words gave comfort, but were they enough to erase the trauma of what so many had witnessed? The Challenger disaster occurred against a backdrop of Cold War tension and technological ambition. The space race, once a symbol of American ingenuity, had become a high-stakes arena for geopolitical power. Yet the 80s were also an era of cultural contradictions, a time of optimism and excess, but also underlying unease older generations simply couldn't ignore. Reagan's presidency brought economic changes and a renewed sense of patriotism, but also debates about inequality and the looming threat of nuclear war. And dare we forget his absolute ignorance over the AIDS crisis at the time? For Gen X, growing up in this environment meant navigating a world that often seemed uncertain and unpredictable. And younger generations wonder why we're so thick-skinned, cynical, and skeptical. In the face of challenging times, Gen X found ways to cope. We retreated into the vibrant world of pop culture. Iconic movies like The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, and 16 Candles, video games like Pac-Man and Space Invaders, and the rebellious sounds of punk rock and new wave. We became the latchkey kids, making us fiercely independent and resourceful. I mean, who else babysat kids at just 12 years old? The Challenger disaster left an indelible mark on a generation. It reminded us of the risks of exploration and the cost of progress. For Gen X, it became one of those "where were you" moments, a shared experience that shaped our collective identity. Today, space exploration continues, inspired by the bravery of those who came before. The lessons of Challenger remind us to honor their sacrifices while pushing the boundaries of what's possible. As we look to the heavens, we carry the memory of Challenger's crew with us, a reminder of the human spirit's unyielding desire to reach for the stars. Where were you when the Challenger disaster happened? What are your memories of that day, and how did it impact you? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. Studs sure would appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. TTFN, ta-ta for now.